Imagine yourself a priest in the year 1396, standing in the shadowed, cold stone halls of Westminster Abbey. The air bites at your fingertips as you clutch your worn prayer book, its leather binding smooth from years of use. Your breath forms fleeting mists in the chill autumn morning, mingling with the faint scent of beeswax from the flickering candles lining the nave. Around you, servants dart through the cavernous space, their hurried footsteps echoing off the vaulted ceilings as they arrange tapestries of crimson and gold, embroidered with the lions of England and the fleur-de-lis of France. Courtiers huddle in small clusters, their whispers buzzing like bees, speaking of what they call the most extraordinary royal wedding England has ever seen. You've blessed many unions in your time, lords and ladies, knights and their betrothed, but nothing has prepared you for the spectacle unfolding before you. The great oak doors groan open, and a hush falls over the gathered nobles. You crane your neck, heart quickening, as the wedding party processes down the aisle. King Richard II strides forward, a commanding figure at 29, his golden hair catching the fractured light streaming through the stained-glass windows. His velvet robes, heavy with ermine, shimmer in the muted glow, and his eyes carry the weight of a man who has ruled since boyhood. He is every inch a king, his presence filling the abbey with an aura of authority. Yet it is not Richard who draws your gaze, nor the glittering retinue of dukes and earls trailing behind him. It is the small figure at his side, her tiny hand engulfed in his gloved palm, that makes your breath catch and your grip tighten on the altar rail. She cannot be more than 6 or 7. This child in an elaborate French gown of silk and silver thread, her dark hair braided with pearls that seem to weigh down her delicate frame. Her slippered feet barely make a sound on the stone floor, and her large, dark eyes dart about, taking in the soaring Gothic arches and the sea of unfamiliar faces. This is Isabella of Valois, daughter of King Charles VI of France, and today she will become Queen of England. You've seen young brides before, noble girls of 12 or 13, wed to seal alliances or secure inheritances, but this is different. The sheer youth of this princess, her small stature against the towering king, feels like a moment suspended between awe and unease. You steady yourself, your voice low as you murmur a prayer, wondering what God's plan could be for such an unlikely union. In the world you inhabit, life is fleeting, its fragility etched into every soul. Just 50 years ago, the Black Death swept through England, claiming half the population in a merciless tide. Villages were left empty, fields untended, and the cries of the bereaved still linger in the collective memory. Political marriages are the mortar that binds kingdoms, especially in times as precarious as these. Kings must forge alliances swiftly before war or plague can unravel their realms. You understand this, as do the nobles who watch with calculating eyes, their furs and jewels catching the candlelight. Yet understanding does not quiet the strange rhythm of your heart as you watch this child step toward her destiny. The ceremony begins, and you raise your voice to lead the sacred rites, your Latin steady despite the weight of the moment. Isabella stands before the altar, her face a study in curiosity rather than fear. Her eyes, wide and luminous, trace the intricate carvings of the rood screen, the golden chalices gleaming on the altar, the nobles in their silks and velvets who bow as she passes. She seems less a bride and more a delicate figurine, placed carefully in a grand tableau. King Richard speaks his vows with a gentleness that surprises you, his voice soft, almost protective, as if he senses the fragility of the moment. This is no tale of a tyrant seizing a child for base desires, but a king fulfilling a duty to his realm, binding England to France in a sacred pact meant to end decades of bloodshed. The marriage, will not be consummated. The court has made this clear, their whispers reaching even your ears. Isabella will be raised at the English court, educated in the ways of her new home until she comes of age. This is the way of noble unions, where children are betrothed to secure peace, their lives woven into the fabric of diplomacy before they can fully comprehend their roles. As you pronounce them husband and wife, your voice echoes through the abbey, and the congregation murmurs its approval. Yet your thoughts linger on the child queen, her small hand raised to receive the ring that symbolizes her new title. What future awaits her in this dangerous game of thrones, where alliances shift like sand and loyalty is as rare as a winter rose? To grasp the weight of this moment, we must step back into the world that shaped it. Isabella's marriage was no mere ceremony, but a cornerstone of medieval diplomacy, designed to halt the Hundred Years' War, a conflict that had bled both England and France dry for nearly 6 decades. The union of a child and a king was not born of romance, but of necessity, a desperate bid to forge peace between two nations locked in a struggle for supremacy. Isabella, born on November 9th, 1389, at the Louvre Palace in Paris, was no ordinary child, but a princess of Valois, her bloodline a currency more valuable than gold. Her father, King Charles VI, was a man of brilliance and madness, his mind a battlefield where lucidity warred with delusion. Her mother, Isabella of Bavaria, was a woman of fierce ambition, navigating a court where power was as slippery as the Seine's currents. The wedding at Westminster was not just a union of two people, but a symbol of hope for two weary kingdoms. The Hundred Years' War had ravaged fields, emptied treasuries, and sown mistrust that festered like a wound. Isabella's role as a bride was to bridge this chasm, her youth a promise of a new beginning untainted by past hatreds. Yet even as you stand at the altar, watching the child queen take her place beside Richard, you cannot shake the feeling that her path will be fraught with peril. The noble smiles are polite, but their eyes are sharp, and the weight of their ambitions presses against the fragile peace this marriage seeks to secure. What will become of this girl, thrust into the heart of England's court, where every word and gesture carries the potential for triumph or ruin? Her story is only beginning, and its end is as uncertain as the flickering shadows cast by the abbey's candles. The marriage of Isabella of Valois to Richard II was never intended to be a tale of love, but a calculated stroke of medieval diplomacy, a delicate thread woven into the fraying tapestry of the Hundred Years' War. To understand the weight of this child's role, we must step into the opulent yet unstable world of her birth, where the glittering halls of the Louvre Palace masked a kingdom teetering on the edge of chaos. Isabella entered the world on November 9th, 1389, as the eldest daughter of King Charles VI of France, a monarch whose brilliance was eclipsed by bouts of madness that left his court in disarray. Her mother, Isabella of Bavaria, was a woman of sharp intellect and sharper ambition, her eyes always scanning the horizon for opportunities to secure her family's power. In this world of intrigue and uncertainty, young Isabella was not just a princess, but a pawn in a grand game, her future shaped by forces she could scarcely comprehend. Picture the Louvre in 1389, its stone walls draped with tapestries depicting heroic knights and saintly martyrs, the air thick with the scent of rosewater and the murmur of courtiers plotting in hushed tones. The French court was a dazzling but perilous place, where loyalty shifted like the wind and every smile hid a motive. Charles VI, known to history as Charles the Mad, was a ruler of contradictions. On his good days, he was a visionary king, charming and generous, delighting in lavish feasts and showering his children with gifts. Little Isabella, with her dark curls and curious eyes, might have giggled as he lifted her onto his knee, presenting her with a tiny jeweled bird that chirped when wound with a key. But these moments of warmth were fleeting. When madness seized him, Charles transformed into a stranger, cowering in corners, convinced he was made of glass, his body so fragile that a single touch might shatter it. Servants would whisk Isabella and her siblings away, their hurried footsteps echoing down candlelit corridors as their father raved about invisible assassins or refused to bathe for months, his unkempt hair and wild eyes a stark contrast to his royal dignity. Growing up in such a court, Isabella learned early to navigate uncertainty. The palace was a world of contrasts, opulent banquets where minstrels played and nobles danced, juxtaposed with whispered fears of the king's next episode. Her mother, Isabeau, was the anchor in this storm, a Bavarian princess who had mastered the art of survival in a foreign land. Beautiful and cunning, Isabeau understood that her children were her greatest assets in the chessboard of European politics. She watched Isabella with a calculating gaze, noting her grace, her quick mind, and the royal blood that made her a prize for any kingdom. In a world where alliances were forged through marriage, Isabella's beauty and lineage were as valuable as any army. Isabeau, herself only 19 when Isabella was born, had learned to wield influence in a court dominated by men, and she intended to ensure her daughter's value was not squandered. The France of Isabella's childhood was a land scarred by war. For nearly 6 decades, the Hundred Years' War had raged, a brutal conflict sparked by English claims to the French throne, but fueled by deeper struggles over trade, territory, and national pride. French villages lay in ruins, their fields trampled by English raids, their people haunted by the memory of battles like Agincourt, where French knights had fallen in droves. The war was not just a clash of armies, but a cultural wound, deepening mistrust between two peoples who shared a narrow strip of sea. In Paris, the war's toll was visible in the gaunt faces of merchants, the empty stalls and markets, and the constant flow of refugees seeking shelter within the city's walls. Isabella, though shielded by her royal status, could not have been unaware of the tension that permeated her world. Her tutors spoke of England as both a rival and a mirror, a kingdom whose language and customs differed, yet whose fate was intertwined with France's. Isabeau's ambitions for her daughter were shaped by this relentless conflict. As Charles VI's episodes grew more frequent, France's governance fell increasingly to his advisors and his queen. Isabeau saw in Isabella a chance to secure a lasting advantage, a way to bind France to a powerful ally, or at least neutralize a dangerous foe. The idea of marrying Isabella to an English king was not born in a vacuum, but in the smoke-filled council chambers where diplomats and nobles debated how to end a war that had exhausted both nations. By 1395, when Isabella was just 6, these whispers of peace had grown louder, driven by the mutual desperation of two kingdoms bled dry by decades of fighting. The French court, with its factionalism and intrigue, was a crucible where such ideas were forged, and Isabella, though unaware, was at its center. To enrich this picture, consider the cultural vibrancy of the French court despite its instability. The Louvre was not just a fortress, but a hub of medieval art and learning, where illuminated manuscripts glowed with gold leaf and minstrels sang of chivalric ideals. Isabella's early years would have been steeped in this world, her cradle surrounded by tapestries depicting the deeds of Roland or the piety of St. Louis. Her nurses likely sang French lullabies, their melodies carrying tales of heroic knights, while her tutors introduced her to the rudiments of Latin and the stories of her Valois ancestors. Yet this cultural richness was shadowed by the ever-present threat of her father's madness and the war that loomed beyond the palace walls. The contrast between the court's splendor and its fragility would have left an impression on young Isabella, shaping her into a child who was both precocious and cautious, aware that beauty and danger were never far apart. The Hundred Years' War, by the time of Isabella's birth, had evolved far beyond its original cause. What began as a dynastic dispute had become a struggle for survival, with England and France vying for economic dominance and territorial control. The war's brutality was legendary. Entire regions of Aquitaine and Normandy had been reduced to wastelands, their vineyards burned, their churches looted. In France, the peasantry bore the brunt of English chevauchés, raiding campaigns designed to terrorize and impoverish. Meanwhile, English nobles poured their fortunes into campaigns across the Channel, their coffers drained by the cost of archers and siege engines. The war had created a generation that knew only conflict, and by the 1390s, both sides were desperate for respite. Isabella's marriage would be the linchpin of a proposed truce, a human bridge across a sea of enmity. A child, Isabella could not have grasped the full scope of her role, but the adults around her did. Her mother's advisors, men like the Duke of Burgundy and the Count of Armagnac, saw in her a chance to reshape the political landscape. The French court was a labyrinth of competing factions, each vying for influence over the increasingly erratic king. Isabeau, navigating these treacherous waters, knew that her daughter's marriage could tip the balance, securing peace with England while strengthening her own position at home. The stakes were immense. A successful alliance could stabilize France, replenish its treasury, and restore its battered pride. A failure could plunge the kingdom deeper into chaos, leaving it vulnerable to both external enemies and internal rivals. Isabella's childhood, then, was a preparation for a destiny she did not choose. Her playthings were not just dolls, but symbols of her future. Miniature crowns, tiny gowns stitched with gold thread, gifts from ambassadors hinting at her value. Her tutors began teaching her the rudiments of English, simple phrases that sounded strange on her tongue, as seamstresses measured her for a trousseau fit for a queen. To her, these were games as unreal as the fairy tales her nurses whispered at bedtime. Yet to the adults who shaped her world, they were the opening moves in a high-stakes gambit. As we follow Isabella's journey, the question looms: how would this child, born into a court of madness and ambition, navigate the weight of a crown placed upon her at such a tender age? Her story, already extraordinary, is poised to unfold into a saga of resilience and sacrifice. To grasp the extraordinary role thrust upon 6-year-old Isabella of Valois, we must first understand the crucible of the Hundred Years' War, a conflict that had carved deep scars across England and France by the 1390s. This was no mere dynastic squabble, but a relentless struggle that had consumed nearly 6 decades, reshaping nations, economies, and lives. It was a war born of ambition, but sustained by desperation, and Isabella's marriage to Richard II was a bold, almost desperate attempt to halt its devastation. Picture a Europe where fields lay blackened from raids, where villages echoed with the cries of the displaced, and where 2 proud kingdoms teetered on the edge of collapse, their treasuries drained and their people weary. Into this maelstrom stepped a child, her small frame bearing the weight of a hope for peace. The Hundred Years' War began in 1337, sparked by Edward III of England's claim to the French throne through his mother, Isabella of France. What started as a legal dispute over succession quickly spiraled into a complex web of territorial ambitions, economic rivalry, and national pride. By the 1390s, the war had raged through generations, its battles, Crécy, Poitiers, Agincourt, etched into the collective memory like wounds that refused to heal. French peasants saw their harvests burned by English chevauchés, brutal raids designed to cripple morale and resources. In Gascony and Normandy, once thriving towns were reduced to rubble, their churches looted, their people scattered. Across the Channel, English nobles poured their fortunes into campaigns, funding longbowmen and siege engines, only to return with empty coffers and tales of Pyrrhic victories. The war had become a grinding machine, devouring lives and wealth with no clear end. Why Isabella's birth in 1389. Both kingdoms were exhausted. France's economy staggered under the weight of ransoms paid for captured nobles, while England's treasury groaned from the cost of maintaining garrisons in Calais and Bordeaux. The social toll was equally grim. In France, the Jacquerie Revolt of 1358 had seen peasants rise against their lords, only to be slaughtered in a brutal reprisal, leaving a legacy of mistrust. In England, the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, sparked by war taxes, had shaken the monarchy's foundations, with Richard II himself, then a boy of 14, facing down rebels in London. These upheavals revealed the fragility of both realms, where the common folk bore the war's brunt while nobles schemed for advantage. The war had evolved beyond its original cause, becoming a struggle for identity. English versus French, insular pride against continental ambition. In the courts of Paris and London, whispers of peace began to emerge by the mid-1390s. The costs were too high, the losses too great. France, under Charles VI's erratic rule, faced internal divisions, with powerful dukes like Burgundy and Orleans vying for control during the king's bouts of madness. England, meanwhile, grappled with its own challenges. Richard II's reign was marred by tensions with his nobles, many of whom resented his reliance on court favorites and his lavish spending. Both kingdoms needed respite, but peace required more than words. It demanded bonds forged in blood and oath. Marriage was the medieval world's strongest glue, and a union between the houses of Valois and Plantagenet offered a chance to bind wounds that swords could not heal. Enter Isabella, a child of 6, whose very youth was both her burden and her value. In 1395, secret negotiations began between French and English ambassadors, cloaked in the secrecy of candlelit chambers and coded dispatches. The French proposed a daring plan: marry their king's eldest daughter to Richard II, sealing a 28-year truce that would allow a generation to grow without knowing war's shadow. The offer was audacious, not least because of Isabella's age. Even in an era where noble girls were betrothed young, often at 12 or 13, 6 was exceptional, a choice that raised eyebrows even among hardened diplomats. Yet the French argued that her youth was a strength. Untainted by the war's hatreds, she could grow into a queen who embodied both nations, a living symbol of reconciliation. The negotiations were not merely political, but deeply cultural, reflecting the distinct identities of the two kingdoms. In France, the court of Charles VI was a center of chivalric ideals, where troubadours sang of courtly love and knights competed in tournaments to prove their valor. Yet beneath this veneer lay a fractured realm, its unity strained by the king's madness and the ambitions of his relatives. England, by contrast, prided itself on its insular strength, its longbowmen and merchant fleets defining a burgeoning national identity. The English saw the French as decadent, their court a maze of intrigue. The French viewed the English as barbaric, their raids a violation of chivalric honor. Isabella's marriage was meant to bridge this cultural chasm, her French upbringing merging with English customs to create a shared future. Deep in the stakes, consider the economic devastation that drove these talks. By the 1390s, France's wine trade, once the lifeblood of regions like Bordeaux, had collapsed under English occupation, with vineyards uprooted and casks left to rot. In England, wool exports, the backbone of the economy, suffered as war disrupted trade routes, leaving merchants in London and York clamoring for peace to restore prosperity. These pressures weighed on the negotiators, who knew that failure could plunge their nations back into a cycle of raids and reprisals. The dowry offered for Isabella, 800,000 francs, a sum equivalent to millions in modern terms, was a testament to France's desperation, a fortune meant to refill England's coffers and fund Richard's court for years. Isabella herself remained blissfully unaware of these machinations. In Paris, she played with wooden dolls carved to resemble French knights, her small hands arranging them in mock tournaments while her nurses sang of Charlemagne's exploits. Her world was one of fairy tales and fleeting moments with a father who might one day shower her with affection and the next retreat into his delusions. Yet even as she played, her fate was being sealed in smoky council rooms, where men with ink-stained fingers drafted treaties that would send her across the sea. The war's shadow loomed large, its battles and betrayals shaping the world she would soon enter. How would this child, plucked from her nursery, navigate the expectations of two kingdoms? Her story, poised on the edge of diplomacy and danger, promises a journey as gripping as any chronicle of the age. Richard II's grief over his first wife, and of Bohemia, hung over the English court like a persistent fog, a sorrow that deepened the urgency of the peace negotiations with France. And, known as Good Queen, and had been a beacon of gentleness and charity, adored by the English people for her compassion toward the poor and her efforts to mediate disputes among the nobles. Her death from the plague in 1394, at the age of 28, had left Richard shattered, his once vibrant court plunged into mourning. The king, who had shared a rare bond of genuine affection with and uncommon in royal marriages, resisted his advisors' urgings to remarry quickly. Without an heir, his throne was vulnerable, a fact that gnawed at the stability of his realm. Yet the thought of replacing and felt like a betrayal, her memory a sacred flame he was loath to extinguish. Into this emotional void stepped the French ambassadors in 1395, bearing a proposal that blended diplomacy with the promise of renewal. The hand of 6-year-old Isabella of Valois, daughter of Charles VI, the French offer was nothing short of audacious, a masterpiece of political maneuvering designed to end the Hundred Years' War's ceaseless drain on both nations. In exchange for Isabella's hand, France promised a staggering dowry of 800,000 francs, an astronomical sum that could replenish England's war-depleted treasury, fund royal projects, and ease the burden on tax-weary subjects. More crucially, it included a 28-year truce, a span long enough for scars to heal and a new generation to rise without the shadow of conflict. This was no hasty bargain, but a vision of lasting peace, where trade could flourish anew and borders might soften. The French negotiators emphasized Isabella's youth as an asset. She would be raised at the English court, immersed in its customs, language, and loyalties, emerging as a queen who bridged two worlds rather than divided them. That Richard's counselors were sharply divided, their debates echoing through the halls of Windsor Castle, where tapestries depicted ancient battles and the air carried the scent of wood smoke from roaring hearths. Some saw wisdom in the alliance. The dowry alone could finance expeditions against Scotland or quell rebellions in Ireland, while the truce would redirect resources from endless French campaigns. Others fretted over the precedent of wedding a child so young, fearing it might scandalize the nobility or provoke papal disapproval, even in an era where political betrothals often began in cradles. Medieval standards allowed for early marriages among the elite. Girls as young as 12 were common in noble unions. But Isabella's age pushed boundaries, raising whispers of unease among even the most pragmatic lords. Yet the proposal's allure was undeniable, a chance to transform enmity into partnership. What swayed Richard, however, went beyond cold calculation. Court chroniclers noted a softening in his expression when he beheld the miniature portrait of Isabella sent by the French as a token of their sincerity. These portraits, painted on vellum with exquisite detail, her dark eyes wide with innocence, her small features framed by braids, were common in royal matchmaking, serving as windows into potential unions. In Isabella, the childless king saw not just a diplomatic tool, but a ward to nurture, perhaps filling the paternal void left by his heirless marriage to Anne. Whispers at court suggested Richard envisioned himself as both husband and guardian, guiding her through the intricacies of queenship. This personal intrigue blended with duty, tipping the scales toward acceptance. The negotiations stretched for months, ambassadors crossing the channel in ships buffeted by storms, carrying sealed parchments and guarded secrets. Every detail of Isabella's future was dissected. Her household would blend French and English attendants, preserving her heritage while fostering loyalty to her new realm. She could maintain correspondence with her family, practice French customs, and retain her ladies-in-waiting. Most vitally, the treaty explicitly stated the marriage would not be consummated until Isabella reached maturity, a safeguard reflecting medieval concerns for health and consent in such unions. This clause, inscribed in flowing script on vellum, protected both the child and the alliance, ensuring no scandal could unravel the peace. To add depth, consider the cultural exchanges embedded in these talks. French negotiators brought gifts of illuminated manuscripts and fine wines, symbols of their court's sophistication, while English envoys countered with woolen tapestries and hunting falcons, showcasing their island's rugged prosperity. These gestures masked the underlying tensions. France sought to neutralize England's military edge, while England aimed to exploit France's internal strife under Charles VI's madness. Comparisons to other royal matches, like the 1382 union of Richard and Anne, highlighted the rarity of affection in such arrangements. Most were like business deals, with brides as collateral. Meanwhile, In Paris, Isabella remained oblivious, her days filled with dolls dressed in miniature gowns and lessons in courtly graces. Tutors introduced English phrases, their foreign sounds tripping over her tongue like a game, while seamstresses crafted a trousseau of silks and velvets. She was told of a great king across the water, a fairy tale figure who would make her a queen, but at 6, it was as distant as the stars. As the treaty solidified, the stage was set for a union that promised peace but carried the seeds of unforeseen turmoil. How would this grieving king and innocent child navigate the expectations of their roles? The answer lay in the ceremonies to come, where symbolism would meet reality in a display of medieval pageantry. The negotiations that sealed Isabella's fate dragged on for months, an intricate dance of diplomacy conducted across the stormy channel, where ambassadors braved rough seas to ferry proposals sealed with wax and ribbon. Every clause was debated with the precision of scholars parsing ancient texts. Isabella's household, her education, even the fabrics of her wardrobe. The treaty's core safeguard, that the marriage would remain unconsummated until her maturity, reflected a rare nod to humanity amid political calculus, ensuring the child's well-being while preserving the alliance's integrity. In Paris, Isabella remained blissfully detached from these machinations, her days a whirlwind of innocent play. She arranged her dolls in mock courts, mimicking the grandeur she glimpsed around her, unaware that her own life was being scripted in distant chambers. Tutors gently introduced English phrases, their sounds as playful as nursery rhymes, while seamstresses fitted her for a trousseau of silks embroidered with golden threads, each stitch a thread in the web of international accord. The wedding unfolded not in a single ceremony but twice, a reflection of a union's diplomatic delicacy. First came the intimate rite on October 31st, 1396, in the English-held port of Calais, a sliver of neutral ground on French soil where the two kingdoms could meet without conceding pride. Calais Castle's great hall, with its stone walls echoing the crash of nearby waves, hosted a select gathering of negotiators and high nobles. Isabella, now 7, arrived in a gown of cloth of gold, so laden with embroidery and pearls that attendants steadied her steps. The weight of the fabric mirrored the gravity of the moment, her small form overwhelmed yet resolute. Richard knelt to her level to exchange rings, his touch gentle as he lifted her chin, easing the fear flickering in her eyes amid the stern faces of assembled lords. Witnesses noted the king's protective demeanor, a far cry from the stern ruler of chronicles, as vows were spoken in Latin, binding child and king in a pact scented with incense and sea salt. A year later, on January 5th, 1397, came the coronation at Westminster Abbey, a spectacle designed to proclaim the marriage's legitimacy to England and the world. London buzzed with anticipation, crowds swelling the streets despite the winter chill, their breaths clouding the air as they craned for glimpses of the child queen. Tragically, several perished in the crush, trampled in the fervor to witness history. The procession was a feast for the senses. Isabella rode in a litter adorned with English roses and French fleurs-de-lis, symbols of intertwined destinies woven in silk and gold. Her crown, specially crafted for her diminutive head, gleamed with rubies and sapphires, while English duchesses bore her train, their roles as guardians underscoring the cultural fusion at play. The crowds roared blessings in guttural English, a language Isabella was only beginning to parse, but she waved with practiced poise, her small hand a beacon amid the sea of faces. Cultural contrasts sharpened the drama of these events. French customs, with their emphasis on elaborate courtly rituals and troubadour songs, clashed and blended with English traditions of hearty feasts and folk cheers. In Calais, the ceremony's intimacy echoed French salons, where diplomacy unfolded in hushed tones over wine. In Westminster, it exploded into English pageantry, with trumpets blaring and banners fluttering like autumn leaves. The coronation feast spanned 3 days, tables groaning under roasted swans, spiced pies, and rivers of ale, English staples mingling with French delicacies like sugared almonds and fine Bordeaux. Jugglers tumbled, musicians strummed lutes, and actors staged tableaus of a harmonious future where lions and lilies danced in unity. Isabella sat beside Richard at the high table, her manners impeccable under her tutor's watchful eyes, as nobles toasted her health, their goblets raised in a cacophony of hope and calculation. Yet beneath the revelry lurked undercurrents of doubt. Experienced courtiers, versed in the fragility of medieval truces, whispered of potential fractures. Richard, though powerful, faced simmering discontent among nobles who chafed at his favoritism and his pivot toward peace when England's arms still held sway. The massive dowry promised prosperity, but some saw the child bride as a sign of weakness, a negotiation where conquest might have prevailed. Isabella, picking delicately at her food, absorbed the atmosphere with a child's intuition, her dark eyes flitting from face to face. The feast's opulence, candles casting golden glows on jewel-encrusted gowns, masked these tensions, but they foreshadowed the storms ahead. For now, the young queen was ensconced in safety. Richard housed her in lavish apartments at Westminster Palace, a blend of French elegance and English solidity, with chambers warmed by roaring fires and walls hung with tapestries of Arthurian legends. Her household merged the two cultures. French ladies-in-waiting in flowing robes chattered in their native tongue, while English attendants introduced customs like the curtsy's precise dip. This fusion extended to her daily life. Meals favoring wine over ale, lessons weaving French fables with English folklore. The pageantry of her weddings had not just sealed a treaty, but launched Isabella into a world where every gesture bridged divides, her innocence a canvas for the hopes of two nations. As the feasts wound down, one wondered, how long could this fragile harmony endure? Isabella's early days at the English court unfolded like a carefully scripted tapestry, weaving her French heritage into the robust fabric of English royal life, under the watchful eye of a king who treated her with unexpected tenderness. Installed in her own apartments at Westminster Palace, where the Thames whispered beyond stone walls and fireplaces crackled with the scent of oak logs, Isabella found a world both familiar and foreign. Her chambers were a blend of cultures. French tapestries depicting chivalric romances hung alongside English heraldic banners, while the air carried the mingled aromas of lavender from her homeland and rosemary from English gardens. Staffed with a household that fused French ladies-in-waiting, loyal women in flowing gowns who spoke in melodic tones, with English attendants teaching the nuances of local etiquette, her new home was designed to nurture rather than overwhelm. Her education began in earnest, a regimen that transformed the wide-eyed child into a budding queen. Days brimmed with lessons. Languages, where French melodies gave way to the rolling cadences of English. Courtly accomplishments like needlework, where her small fingers stitched patterns of roses and fleurs de lis, and the intricate dance of protocol, from the precise depth of a curtsy to the art of addressing nobles without offense. Richard himself took a keen interest, visiting her apartments with the regularity of a devoted guardian. Chronicles describe him arriving with gifts that sparked wonder. Exotic birds from Ireland, their feathers iridescent as jewels, finely bound books from Oxford scholars, pages illuminated with gold-leaf tales of ancient kings, and musical instruments crafted by London's master artisans, lutes and harps that filled her rooms with melody. These visits blended formality with affection, Isabella greeting him with a mix of curtsy and embrace, her growing comfort a testament to his kindness. The other children at court embraced Isabella as one of their own, turning the palace into a playground amid politics. Medieval royal households teemed with young nobles fostered alongside the monarch's kin, learning loyalty through shared games and studies. Isabella formed bonds that eased her transition, particularly with Margaret Holland, daughter of Richard's half-brother Thomas Holland, Earl of Kent. At 9, Margaret seemed worldly to Isabella, her 2-year advantage a bridge to understanding the court's subtleties. Together, They navigated the hierarchies, Margaret teaching English children's games like Hoodman's Blind and Nineman's Morris, where laughter echoed in sun-dappled courtyards. She whispered secrets of trustworthy ladies-in-waiting and warned of the undercurrents swirling beneath polite smiles, her insights drawn from a family steeped in royal intrigue. In Isabella's private garden, enclosed by hedges buzzing with bees and scented with blooming herbs, the girls spent hours on needlework, their stitches forming patterns while Margaret unraveled the genealogies of English houses. She spoke of ancient feuds, the wars of the barons, where lords rose against kings, or the simmering rivalries between Lancastrians and Yorkists that lingered like ghosts at feasts. Isabella, quick-witted and observant, absorbed these lessons with the earnestness of one sensing her place in a larger drama. "Why do the nobles watch each other so carefully?" she once asked, her French accent softening the words. In France, factions quarreled, but here, an air of anticipation hung heavy. Margaret, wise beyond her years, explained Richard's turbulent reign. A major rebellion in his youth, the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, had scarred him, fostering distrust of those who opposed his vision. Power in England, Margaret noted, was a shared mantle, not solely the king's to wear. Richard's fondness for favorites and his pursuit of peace with France irked warriors who preferred conquest's glory. Isabella's marriage bolstered him, bringing truce and treasure, yet some whispered it revealed weakness, a preference for words over swords. These conversations sharpened Isabella's gaze. She began observing court with new acuity, noting how voices hushed at Richard's approach, how topics shifted in her presence, how even her French attendants measured their words on politics. Her education extended beyond books, becoming a masterclass in the subtle arts of survival. Historical parallels enriched her world. Tutors drew comparisons to earlier queens like Eleanor of Aquitaine, who wielded influence across realms, or Anne of Bohemia, whose charity Isabella emulated in small acts, like sharing sweets with servant children. These stories hooked her curiosity, blending surprise with aspiration. Yet beneath this nurturing veil simmered noble discontent, a low rumble like distant thunder. Richard's rule, marked by opulent displays and assertive policies, alienated powerful lords who felt sidelined. Isabella, in her innocence, sensed the tension without naming it, her friendships a shield against isolation. As the years 1397 and 1398 passed in relative peace, Isabella blossomed from a timid arrival into a confident girl, her English fluent, her steps sure through Westminster's maze. The court's rhythms became her own, the stone walls familiar sentinels. But even in this idyll, hooks of intrigue dangled, whispers of exiled cousins, border skirmishes with Scotland that hinted at fragility. How long could this paternal haven endure amid the Game of Thrones? Isabella's story, already a blend of wonder and warning, poised for the storms that would test her budding resilience. The years 1397 and 1398 were a golden interlude for Isabella, a time when the English court felt like a sanctuary, its rhythms as familiar as the tides of the Thames. At 8, she moved through Westminster's halls with growing ease, no longer lost in the maze of stone corridors where torchlight danced on tapestries of mythical beasts. Her English, once halting, now flowed with the court's polished cadence, shaped by tutors who drilled her in its nuances over French-inflected vowels. Her days were a tapestry of learning. Needlework and music, yes, but also deeper studies that set her apart from most noble girls. Richard insisted on an education befitting a queen, not just a consort. She pored over chronicles of English and French kings, her small hands turning parchment pages that recounted the deeds of Alfred the Great and Charlemagne, their triumphs and follies a mirror to her own unfolding role. Her favorite lessons were with Master William, a learned clerk whose maps unfurled across her study chamber like windows to the world. Kneeling beside these parchments, Isabella traced coastlines with a delicate finger, marveling at the narrow channel separating Dover from Calais. A strip of water, Master William said, that was both bridge and barrier between England and France. Your marriage, your grace, he told her, his voice soft with reverence, is a hope that it may only be a bridge. She nodded, her 8-year-old mind grasping the weight of her symbolic role, even if its full meaning eluded her. These lessons, enriched with tales of Viking invasions and Norman conquests, hooked her curiosity, planting seeds of understanding about the conflicts that shaped her destiny. The maps, with their curling rivers and jagged borders, became a canvas for imagining the ships and ambassadors that carried her fate. Isabella's bond with Richard deepened in these years, his visits a highlight amid her structured days. He brought gifts that sparked joy, a psalter with illuminated margins, its saints glowing in gold and azure, a silver harp whose strings sang under her tentative touch, a caged lark from Wales, its trills echoing her own caged freedom. His kindness was paternal, not merely kingly, and she began to see him as a protector, his presence a shield against the court's complexities. Yet even in this haven, she sensed undercurrents. Margaret Holland, her confidant, spoke of Richard's early reign, scarred by the peasants' revolt of 1381 when he, barely older than Isabella now, faced rebels demanding justice. The memory lingered in his mistrust of certain nobles, whose deference masked ambition. They watch him, Margaret whispered, and they watch you, for you are his peace with France. These lessons in politics were not just gossip, but survival skills. Isabella noticed how conversations stilled when Richard entered, how noble smiles tightened, their eyes darting like hawks. Her French ladies-in-waiting, though loyal, spoke cautiously of England's affairs, their words veiled as if fearing betrayal. The court, for all its splendor, banquets where minstrels played and tables groaned under roasted boar, was a chessboard where every move carried risk. Historical parallels sharpened her awareness. Tales of Edward II's fall, undone by noble discontent, or the intrigues that toppled French kings, whispered by her tutors, underscored the fragility of crowns. Isabella, though young, began to see herself not just as a child, but as a piece in a larger game, her presence a delicate balance between alliance and ambition. The first cracks in this stability appeared in early 1399, subtle at first, like frost creeping across a window pane. Isabella, now 9, noticed shifts in the court's atmosphere. Laughter grew strained, whispers more urgent. Her ladies-in-waiting exchanged glances when they thought she wasn't looking, their embroidery needles pausing mid-stitch. Even Margaret seemed distracted, her usual chatter about court games replaced by silences. Richard's visits grew less frequent, his face etched with preoccupation when he did appear. Once, she caught him staring out her chamber window toward the Thames, as if expecting an army to sail into view. His gifts, once a stream of books and trinkets, slowed, leaving Isabella to wonder if she had displeased him. The truth, far graver, was unfolding beyond her sight, that Richard's reign was unraveling. His cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, exiled in 1398 for challenging royal authority, had returned to England with an army, ostensibly to reclaim his Lancastrian inheritance, but clearly aiming higher. The exile stemmed from a feud with Thomas Mowbray, a dispute Richard had quelled by banishing both, a decision that inflamed tensions among nobles already wary of his rule. Henry's return in 1399 was a spark in a tinderbox. Lords, chafing under Richard's favoritism and high taxes, rallied to his banner, seeing a chance to reshape the crown's power. The court's harmony, which had sheltered Isabella, began to fracture, its fault lines exposed by ambition and betrayal. Isabella's world, once a cocoon of lessons and laughter, grew shadowed. She overheard snippets, servants murmuring of Lancaster ships or the king's enemies, and felt the air thicken with unease. Her education, steeped in history, offered context. Rebellions like the 1327 deposition of Edward II, where nobles and a queen toppled a king, echoed in these whispers. Richard's peace with France, symbolized by her marriage, was a triumph to some, but a weakness to others, who craved the glory of war. As spring turned to summer, the court's pulse quickened, and Isabella, with a child's sharp intuition, sensed the gathering storm. What would become of her in a kingdom where loyalty was as fleeting as a winter sun? The spring of 1399 brought a chill to Isabella's world that no fire in Westminster's hearths could dispel. The court, once a haven of lessons and laughter, pulsed with a nervous energy as if the very stones of the palace sensed the coming storm. Isabella, now 9, felt the shift acutely. Conversations halted abruptly when she entered rooms, courtiers' smiles tightening into masks. Her English ladies-in-waiting whispered in corners, their eyes darting like minnows, while her French attendants offered vague reassurances in their lilting tones. Even Margaret Holland, her steadfast friend, grew tense, her usual tales of court intrigue replaced by distracted silences. Richard's visits, once a bright thread in her days, became rare, his face shadowed with worry when he did appear, his gaze fixed on distant horizons beyond the Thames. Isabella, sensing his unease, wondered if she had somehow faltered in her role as queen, her child's heart grappling with fears she could not name. The truth was far darker. Richard II's reign was crumbling under the weight of his own decisions and the ambitions of his cousin, Henry Bolingbroke. Exiled the previous year for a feud with Thomas Mowbray, Henry had landed in Yorkshire in July 1399, claiming he sought only his Lancastrian inheritance. But his army, swelling with disaffected nobles, betrayed grander designs. Richard's rule, marked by lavish spending and reliance on favorites like Robert de Vere, had alienated powerful lords. The peace with France, sealed by Isabella's marriage, was seen by some as a surrender of England's martial pride, and the dowry's riches fueled resentment rather than relief. Historical parallels loomed. The deposition of Edward II in 1327, orchestrated by his queen and nobles, whispered through chronicles Isabella studied, a warning of how swiftly crowns could fall. The crisis erupted one morning when Isabella awoke to chaos. Several English ladies-in-waiting had vanished overnight, their absence a gaping wound in her household. Her French attendants, loyal but evasive, deflected her questions with murmurs of "all is well, Your Grace." By afternoon, shouts echoed from the courtyard below, and peering through her window, Isabella glimpsed armed men in unfamiliar livery, their banners snapping in the wind. Margaret Holland burst into her chambers, pale as moonlight, her voice urgent. "Pack only what you need," she whispered, her hands trembling as she helped gather gowns and books. "We leave for the Tower tonight." Isabella's heart raced. The word Tower, conjuring tales of refuge and prison. "For your safety," Margaret added. But her unfinished sentence hung heavy, a truth too grim for words. The journey to the Tower of London was a stark departure from Isabella's ceremonial processions. No cheering crowds or rose-strewn litters greeted her now. Instead, a small, heavily guarded convoy slipped through London's darkened streets, curtains drawn to muffle the city's unrest. The clatter of hooves and the creak of armor filled the air, replacing the usual bustle of merchants and hawkers. Inside the litter, Isabella clutched a small psalter Richard had given her, its pages a comfort as fear gnawed at her. The tower's silhouette loomed, its walls both fortress and cage. Her apartments, though comfortable with tapestries and cushioned seats, bore barred windows and guarded doors, a reminder that safety came at the cost of freedom. Most English attendants were dismissed, leaving her French ladies as her sole companions, their presence a fragile link to her past. Richard visited on her second day, and the sight of him stole her breath. The king who had gifted her larks and laughter was gone, replaced by a man worn thin by strain. His velvet robes hung rumpled, his golden hair unkempt, and his eyes carried a wildness that echoed her father's darkest moments. Kneeling before her, as he had at Calais, he spoke with a tremor. "My dear child, our circumstances are dire. There are those who question my right to rule, who seek to unravel the peace we built with your father." Isabella, her 9 years belying her composure, asked directly, "Are you still king?" His bitter smile was answer enough. "For now," he said, "but Henry has many supporters, and I may not protect you as I once could." For the first time, Richard spoke to her as an equal, laying bare the brutal reality. Henry Bolingbroke, claiming the throne, had drawn nobles like moths to a flame, their loyalty to Richard eroded by years of perceived slights. The peace with France, her marriage's cornerstone, hung in the balance. "What will happen to me?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear coiling within. Richard's admission, "I don't know," was a dagger to her heart. Henry might use her as a bargaining chip with France or honor their marriage, but her fate hinged on his ambitions. This was her initiation into the merciless arithmetic of politics, where her value as a queen was weighed against war or peace. Weeks passed in the Tower, each day a limbo of whispers and waiting. The city beyond the walls buzzed with rumors of battles in the north, of nobles defecting to Henry's cause, but reliable news was scarce. Isabella's French ladies, her last tether to familiarity, spoke in hushed tones, their loyalty a shield against isolation. Historical accounts, like the betrayal of Richard's grandfather Edward II, haunted her thoughts, their lessons now vivid realities. Her composure, noted by chroniclers, was remarkable. She maintained the dignity of a queen, her small frame unbowed by uncertainty. Yet the question lingered, sharp as a blade. Would she remain a queen or become a pawn in a usurper's game? Artifact Friday equals 9771 for 4 7 artifact underscore the equals 89749 F title equals Isabella underscore of underscore Valois underscore part D content type equals text slash markdown. Isabella's confinement in the Tower of London was a twilight existence, poised between privilege and peril as the kingdom around her unraveled in the autumn of 1399. At 9 years old, she navigated this uncertainty with a composure that belied her age, her small frame cloaked in the dignity of a queen. The tower's stone walls, cold and unyielding, enclosed apartments that were comfortable yet unmistakably a cage, barred windows casting long shadows across tapestries, guards stationed at every door. Her French ladies-in-waiting remained her lifeline, their familiar accents a soft anchor in a sea of dread, but the absence of her English attendants left her isolated, a foreign queen in a court turning hostile. Beyond the walls, London's pulse beat with unrest. Muffled shouts, the clatter of armed men, rumors of Henry Bolingbroke's march south, while Isabella, cut off from reliable news, pieced together fragments from whispers and worried glances. Her days were a delicate dance of maintaining royal decorum while grappling with fear. She rose each morning to prayers led by her French chaplain, her voice steady as she recited Latin verses, clinging to ritual for stability. Her lessons continued, though now tinged with urgency. Tutors drilling her in English phrases to navigate her captor's world, their eyes darting to the door as if expecting interruption. The chronicles she once loved, tales of Edward III's triumphs or Charlemagne's conquests, now felt like warnings, their accounts of deposed kings mirroring Richard's plight. Historical parallels sharpened her fears. Edward II's murder in 1327, orchestrated by those closest to him, loomed as a specter, whispered by her French ladies as they stitched in silence. Yet Isabella remained poised, her curtsies to guards and visitors flawless, her dark eyes masking the turmoil within. Richard's deposition came swiftly, a blow that shook the foundations of her world. By October 1399, Henry Bolingbroke had forced Richard to abdicate, claiming the throne as Henry IV. The news reached Isabella through guarded words, her attendants' faces pale as they spoke of Richard of Bordeaux rather than the king. Her final meeting with Richard, before his transfer to Pontefract Castle, was a heart-wrenching farewell. He knelt before her, his once regal frame diminished, and spoke of betrayal and lost dreams. "You are braver than many grown men," he told her, his voice breaking, "and you must be so now." His absence left a void, The protector who had gifted her larks and laughter now a prisoner, his fate uncertain. The confirmation of his death in early 1400, likely murder, though cloaked in rumors of starvation or accident, struck Isabella like a physical blow. She had not loved him as a wife, but his kindness had been her anchor, and his loss severed her last tie to the life she had built. Henry IV's arrival at the Tower marked a turning point. Tall and battle-hardened, with eyes that weighed her like a merchant assessing a gem, he greeted her formally as Your Grace, a nod to her title that felt more strategic than sincere. "What has become of the king?" she asked, her directness cutting through courtly pretense. "Richard is no longer king," Henry replied, his voice measured, "having abdicated in my favor." Isabella understood the euphemism. Force, not choice, had stripped Richard's crown. Her next question, "What becomes of me?" hung in the air, her fate a puzzle in Henry's new reign. He spoke vaguely of her father's response and her own conduct, leaving her to navigate a path where every word could tip the balance between freedom and captivity. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in survival. Henry's court debated her future. Some urged sending her back to France to signal a break with Richard's treaty. Others saw her as leverage to keep Charles VI in check. Isabella, advised by her loyal French ladies, played her role with precision. She was unfailingly polite, her manners a shield against suspicion, yet never compromised her dignity as queen. Madame de Coucy, her chief lady-in-waiting, coached her in this delicate balance. "You are still England's queen-in-law and in your father's eyes. Hold that ground, and you hold hope." Isabella's composure, noted by chroniclers like Froissart, was extraordinary, her ability to charm without conceding, a testament to her growing acumen. In early 1400, Henry's government issued an ultimatum. Isabella could return to France, but only if she acknowledged him as rightful king and renounced any claim as Richard's widow. The proposal was a diplomatic trap. Her departure would nullify the treaty, freeing Henry from its obligations while avoiding the scandal of expelling a child queen. For Isabella, now 10, the choice was agonizing. Accept exile, erasing her 3 years as queen, or resist and risk indefinite confinement. Her French advisors were split. Some urged acceptance for her safety, others insisted she uphold her legal status. Isabella wrestled with loyalty to Richard's memory and the peace he died for, her child's heart torn between home and honor. Events outpaced her decision. In mid-1401, Charles VI, in a rare lucid moment, demanded her return, threatening war if delayed. Henry, wary of reigniting the Hundred Years' War, agreed to vague terms, allowing both sides to claim diplomatic victory. Isabella's journey back to France in summer 1401 was bittersweet. She left behind Westminster's familiar halls, the garden where she played with Margaret Holland, the great hall where she was crowned. The Channel crossing was a blur of salt spray and creaking timbers, her small retinue huddled against the wind. Arriving in Paris, she found a court changed by time and her father's worsening madness, her English-accented French and adopted customs marking her as an outsider. The girl who had been a queen returned as a widow, her future uncertain in a land that felt both home and foreign. What role would she play in a France riven by factionalism, her past a bridge to a kingdom now ruled by her husband's usurper? Isabella's return to Paris in the summer of 1401 was a homecoming shadowed by estrangement, her 11 years carrying the weight of a queen's experience in a child's frame. The Louvre Palace, once her nursery, now loomed with unfamiliarity, its tapestries of chivalric heroes faded, its halls echoing with the tension of a court fractured by her father's madness. Charles VI, in the grip of a severe episode, failed to recognize her, his eyes vacant as he muttered of invisible foes. Her mother, Isabella of Bavaria, greeted her with a warmth tempered by calculation, her embrace as much a political gesture as a maternal one. Isabella, her French now tinged with an English lilt, stood out in a court where her gowns, cut in London's simpler style, clashed with the ornate silks of Parisian nobility. She was no longer the naive girl who had left at 6, but a former queen, her poise honed by years of navigating English politics, her mind sharpened by survival. The French court of 1401 was a cauldron of intrigue, its unity frayed by Charles VI's erratic rule and the ambitions of rival dukes. Isabeau, steering the kingdom through her husband's incapacity, saw Isabella as both daughter and asset. Her status as Richard II's widow made her a unique figure, a source of intelligence on English affairs and a diplomatic card to play in future alliances. Courtiers questioned her about Henry IV's court, his allies, his defenses, with an insistence that tested her loyalties. Isabella answered with care, offering generalities about English customs while guarding details that could fuel war. Her time in England had left her with a complex affection for its people, from the servants who taught her rhymes to the nobles who cheered her coronation. Betraying them felt as wrong as defying her French kin, and she walked this tightrope with a diplomat's finesse. Her response is vague, yet courteous. Her dignity intact, anti-English sentiment ran high in Paris. The Hundred Years' War's wounds still raw. Courtiers whispered of Isabella's English habits, her preference for wine over ale, her curtsies more measured than French flourishes, as signs of divided loyalty. She countered with grace, relearning French etiquette while subtly showcasing her royal bearing, a reminder of her status as England's queen. Her mother's advisors, men like the Duke of Burgundy, saw her as a tool to bolster French interests, perhaps through a new marriage. Isabeau, ever the strategist, weighed suitors who might leverage Isabella's unique position, her widowhood a rare bridge between two warring realms. Yet Isabella, shaped by her years with Richard, began to form her own views on marriage, craving a partnership of respect rather than mere politics. The French court's cultural vibrancy, despite its turmoil, offered Isabella a chance to reclaim her roots. Minstrels sang of Roland and Arthur, their ballads echoing her childhood, while illuminated manuscripts in the royal library captivated her with tales of saints and knights. Yet this splendor was undercut by factionalism. The Dukes of Orleans and Burgundy vied for power, their rivalry a simmering prelude to civil war. Isabella, taught by her English experience to read court dynamics, noted the guarded glances and whispered plots, her childhood friend Margaret Holland's lessons echoing in her mind. She avoided aligning with any faction, her neutrality a shield in a court where loyalty could be a death sentence. WY 1403, a new proposal emerged that would reshape her life. Charles, Duke of Orleans, her cousin and son of her father's brother Louis, approached with a marriage offer. At 29, Richard's age when he wed her, Charles was a stark contrast. A cultured noble, patron of poets, and a commander hardened by France's feuds. Their meetings, unlike her childhood betrothal, were marked by mutual respect. Charles spoke to her as an equal, his words free of condescension. "I seek not the Queen of England," he told her, "but Isabella of Valois, who has faced two courts and emerged unbroken." His sincerity stirred something new in her, a flicker of attraction, the first stirrings of a young woman's heart at 14. The match promised to keep her within the French royal fold, strengthening Orleans' claim while offering her a partner, not a guardian. The proposal unfolded against a backdrop of rising tensions. In England, Henry IV faced rebellions from the Percy family and uprisings in Wales and Scotland, news that sparked French hawks to dream of invasion. Some saw Isabella as a symbol to rally a restored Plantagenet claim, a notion she found horrifying. Her English years had taught her the cost of war, burned villages, orphaned children, and she recoiled at the thought of bloodshed in her name. When pressed, she spoke diplomatically, warning of England's defenses and the futility of conquest, her words balancing loyalty to France with her lingering care for England's people. Her stance drew criticism from warlike nobles, but won her allies among moderates who valued peace. The marriage negotiations with Charles moved swiftly, driven by the need to secure Isabella before England's chaos altered her value. The French court, with its love of spectacle, buzzed with preparations, seamstresses crafting gowns that blended Valois elegance with Orleans flair. Isabella, no longer a child pawn, approached the match with agency, her experiences forging a resolve to shape her future. Yet the shadow of France's internal strife loomed, the Orleans-Burgundy feud threatening to erupt. As she stood on the cusp of a new chapter, one question burned. Could this marriage offer the stability her first could not, or would it draw her deeper into a kingdom on the brink? Isabella's marriage to Charles of Orleans in June 1406 was a radiant moment, a stark contrast to the diplomatic formality of her childhood wedding to Richard II. At 16, she walked down the aisle of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris with the confidence of a young woman claiming her place in the world. Her gown of deep blue silk, embroidered with golden fleurs-de-lis, shimmered in the cathedral's candlelight, a sapphire and pearl circlet crowning her dark hair. Charles, resplendent in robes of crimson and gold, met her gaze with genuine warmth, his smile free of the calculated deference she had known in England. Their vows, spoken clearly in French, echoed through the vaulted arches, binding them not just as political allies, but as partners in a shared vision. The feast that followed was a celebration of French grandeur. Troubadours sang of love's triumph. Tables groaned under roasted peacocks and spiced wines, and theatrical displays depicted harmony rising from conflict. For Isabella, it was a rare moment of belonging, a reclaiming of her French identity after years in a foreign court. The early years of her marriage were a haven of joy amid France's gathering storms. Charles, a patron of the arts, transformed their court at Blois into a beacon of culture, where poets recited verses and artists illuminated manuscripts with vivid scenes of myth and faith. Isabella embraced this role with fervor, commissioning works like the Livre de Merveilles, a collection of travel tales that mirrored her own journey across kingdoms. Her English experience lent her a unique lens, fostering exchanges with scholars from Italy and Flanders, their letters debating theology and chivalry. She established a scriptorium at Blois, where monks preserved texts from Cicero to Christine de Pizan, her patronage earning her renown as a guardian of knowledge. Charles valued her not as a decorative consort, but as a partner, consulting her on matters of governance, her insights on English politics sharpening his strategies in France's factional maze. Motherhood deepened Isabella's sense of purpose. In 1407, she bore her first child, Joan, a daughter whose birth filled her with fierce resolve to be a present mother, unlike Isabeau's distracted care amid Charles VI's madness. Defying court physicians, Isabella nursed Joan herself, cradling her in chambers warmed by tapestries of Orleans crest. The birth of a son, Charles, in 1408, strengthened their family's claim, his name a nod to her royal lineage. In 1409, Margaret's arrival completed their trio, though the birth came at a grave cost. Complications that nearly claimed Isabella's life, leaving her weakened. Each child was a promise of continuity, and Isabella poured her energy into their upbringing, ensuring they learned French, Latin, and English, their education blending her dual heritage. She whispered to them in both languages, vowing they would know choices she had been denied. Yet the world beyond Blois pressed in relentlessly. France's stability, fragile under Charles VI's erratic rule, teetered as rival factions. The Orleanists, led by Charles's family, and the Burgundians, under John the Fearless, vied for dominance. The assassination of Charles's father, Louis of Orleans, in November 1407 shattered any illusion of peace. Stabbed in Paris streets by Burgundian agents, his murder in broad daylight ignited a civil war, the Armagnac-Burgundian conflict that would tear France apart. Charles, now Duke of Orleans, inherited a mantle of vengeance, his once carefree demeanor hardening into resolve. Isabella, at his side, found their court transformed. Blois halls, once alive with music, now echoed with the clank of armor and the murmurs of war councils. Her movements were curtailed, bodyguards a constant shadow, her letters scrutinized to guard against spies. Isabella adapted with the resilience forged in England. She managed Orleans territories while Charles campaigned, organizing supplies, negotiating with vassals, and maintaining alliances with a diplomat's skill. Her letters from this period, preserved in archives, reveal a woman commanding with quiet authority, arranging grain shipments to besieged towns, soothing fractious lords with promises of favor. Her English years lent her a keen eye for logistics, recalling how Richard's court balanced trade and war. Yet she feared the war's toll, having seen England's villages burned during the Hundred Years' War. She established charities to aid refugees, her compassion earning her the loyalty of Orleans people, who called her La Bonne Duchesse for her efforts to ease their suffering. The cultural richness of Blois persisted, a defiant spark amid conflict. Isabella hosted poets like Alain Chartier, whose verses praised her as a muse of peace, and she corresponded with Christine de Pizan, whose feminist writings resonated with her own journey. These pursuits were a refuge, but also a statement. Her court would not bow to chaos. Her children, too, were a shield against despair. She taught Joan to embroider, Charles to read maps, and Margaret to sing, their laughter a counterpoint to the war's grim drumbeat. Yet each birth weakened her, Margaret's especially, and physicians warned that another pregnancy could be fatal, casting a shadow over her intimacy with Charles. As 1409 dawned, France's civil war deepened, its fields scarred by rival armies, its trade crippled. Isabella, now 19, felt the weight of her role, not just as Duchess, but as a symbol of stability in a fracturing realm. Her dual perspective, shaped by two courts, made her a voice of moderation, urging Charles to seek negotiation over bloodshed. But the assassination's wounds ran deep, and Charles's quest for justice threatened to consume them both. What would become of this family, bound by love yet pulled by war's relentless tide? Isabella's story, a blend of triumph and foreboding, hung in the balance. Isabella's world, once vibrant with the promise of love and cultural patronage, began to dim in the spring of 1409 as her health faltered under the weight of her third childbirth. The arrival of Margaret had been a joy, but the complications that followed left her frail, her body racked by blood loss and infection. For days, she lingered on the edge of life. Her chambers at Blois, a hushed sanctuary where candles burned low and physicians whispered of bleak odds. Charles rarely left her side, his face etched with fear, while messengers carried pleas for prayers across Europe, from Paris to Florence. Her recovery, though a testament to her resilience, was incomplete. Chronic fatigue and respiratory ailments settled into her bones, a shadow that would haunt her remaining months. Medieval medicine, with its leeches and herbal concoctions, offered little clarity, but Isabella, now 19, understood the gravity of her condition, her physicians warning that another pregnancy could prove fatal. This prognosis reshaped her marriage, casting a veil over the physical intimacy she and Charles had cherished. Their love, once expressed freely, became cautious, the fear of conception a silent barrier. Isabella, who had discovered her own desires in Charles's embrace, now faced the pain of restraint, her vibrant spirit tempered by survival's demands. Yet their bond held firm, rooted in shared passions for governance and culture. She threw herself into managing Orleans territories, her letters crisp with directives to stewards and allies, ensuring Charles's armies were fed and fortified. Her English years, where she observed Richard's court balance war and trade, honed her skill in logistics, making her a formidable co-ruler. She negotiated safe passage for refugees, her compassion earning her a reputation as a protector of the downtrodden, even as France's civil war ravaged its heartland. The Armagnac-Burgundian conflict deepened, its brutality mirroring the Hundred Years' War's devastation. Fields lay barren, towns burned, and trade routes withered as armies clashed. Isabella, haunted by memories of English villages raised in her youth, used her position to mitigate suffering, founding almshouses and distributing grain to starving peasants. Her efforts, chronicled by poets like Alain Chartier, painted her as a beacon of mercy in a fractured realm. Yet the war's shadow grew darker in 1410, when John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy, sought an alliance with Henry IV of England, threatening to drag France back into international conflict. Isabella, horrified at the prospect, leveraged her unique status as a former English queen to open secret channels to London. Through intermediaries, she urged Henry to avoid intervention, warning of mutual ruin. Her words a delicate balance of diplomacy and desperation, rooted in her first-hand knowledge of war's toll. Her diplomatic finesse, noted in contemporary letters, revealed a woman who saw Europe's political tapestry with rare clarity. She understood England's defensive strengths, the longbowmen, the fortified ports, and France's vulnerabilities, urging moderation to preserve both realms. These efforts, though hampered by English suspicion of her French ties, elevated her stature as a mediator. In 1409, she played a pivotal role in peace talks between the Orleanist and Burgundian factions, her reputation for fairness bridging divides. Though the negotiations collapsed, her skill won admiration, positioning her as a voice for peace in a court addicted to strife. Her dual perspective, French by birth, English by experience, made her counsel invaluable, her letters to Charles blending strategic insight with pleas for restraint. Isabella's health continued to decline through 1411 and 1412, her respiratory troubles worsening into what was likely tuberculosis, though medieval healers could only name it a wasting sickness. Chronic fatigue sapped her strength, yet her mind remained sharp. She oversaw her children's education, Joan's embroidery, Charles's study of statecraft, Margaret's early lessons, determined they inherit her resilience and compassion. She spent hours in prayer, her faith a refuge as she faced mortality, her chamber adorned with icons of Saint Catherine, patron of young women. Despite her frailty, she continued her cultural patronage, commissioning manuscripts and hosting poets. Her court at Blois a defiant spark of beauty amid war's gloom. Her final months were a quiet preparation for death. Sensing her time was short, she crafted detailed provisions for her children, ensuring their tutors and guardians would uphold her values. She secured Charles's political alliances, knowing her death could embolden their enemies. On September 13, 1409, at the age of 19, Isabella died at Blois, her passing mourned across Europe. Her funeral at the Celestine Convent in Paris drew a vast cortege. Kings, dukes, and scholars paying homage to a woman who embodied courage and compassion. Charles, devastated, never fully recovered, though he later remarried, always honoring her memory. Isabella's legacy endured in her children, who carried her intellect and empathy into French history. Her son Charles a poet, her daughters forging strategic marriages. Her death removed a moderating voice from France's civil war, which raged on, but her life inspired generations. Chroniclers like Froissart praised her as a woman who transcended her era's constraints, a queen and duchess who carved agency from obligation. Modern reflections grapple with her story's moral complexities, her child marriage jarring to contemporary eyes, but her resilience shines through. In a world that treated women as pawns, she became a player, her compassion and wisdom a testament to the human spirit's capacity to triumph over circumstance. Her life, a bridge between kingdoms and eras, reminds us that even in the harshest times, individuals can shape history with courage and grace.